Before we move on, let's talk about what happens when you have a lens-lens combination. So in this case, we have a positive lens that is placed first and a negative lens that is placed next. Let's suppose that the focal length of the positive lens is 10 centimeters and that of the negative lens is minus 10 centimeters. And the distance between them is 30 centimeters. And let's suppose that our object is placed at 20 centimeter in front of the positive lens. So very roughly, since these are lenses, we will use both focal lengths. So I'm going to call this F1 right, and I'm going to call this F1 left for the focal length of the first lens. I'm going to place my object at 20 centimeters. And we always know that light always comes from this side. So if I start drawing it, my principal ray, which I will draw with red, will start parallel to my optical axis. And since this is a lens, the light will go through my first focal. My chief ray, which I will draw with a blue line, since it's a chief ray, it will go through the center of the lens. Now, this is a lens, so that means that I have to use both focal points. So I've already used up my right focal point. So in this case now, I'm going to be left with my left focal point. So I'm going to start drawing that. The ray will go through my focal point. Since this is a lens, the light will go through and they will all meet at a certain point where my image will be formed. Now, since I'm doing this very roughly, you can understand why my lines are not straight, but that's sort of where the image will be. Now, this is image 1 for my first lens, and it serves as my object 2 for the second lens. Now, coming to the second lens, the focal length of this is minus 10. So this means that the focal length will be somewhere here. So I'm going to call this F2 left. And here will be my second focal length. I'll call this F2 right. Understanding that these are, again, this is a lens. Both focal lengths need to be used. Now, when you do this kind of problem, ignore everything that has to do with the first lens and only focus on the second lens. So again, we'll start with our parallel ray, which means it should start parallel to the optical axis. I'm going to make that ray pink now, just so to tell you the difference between the two. It has to start parallel to the optical axis. It hits the optical axis. And since this is a diverging lens, a negative lens, it diverges away. And how much of it diverges away depends on F2 left. So that is my P2 ray. Similar to the chief ray for 1, I'm going to draw this with a purple. Make it thicker so that we can distinguish. It has to pass through this point in the middle and the tip of my object in this case. So it'll go through here and pass through here. Since this is a ray, it goes that way. And that will be my chief 2 ray. Now, what about my focal? So again, since this is a lens, I have to use my F2R. Let me use orange for that. Okay, since I've already used my F2 left, I have to use my F2 right for it. And so in order to figure that out, it has to touch the tip of my object and it has to touch my F2R. So this point and this tip. And the only way for it to do that is if I can say that my ray comes in this way and then it becomes parallel to the optical axis. So now you can see where all of the rays are going. These three rays don't seem to meet anywhere unless we trace this ray back. And now suddenly all of these three rays meet right here in the middle. And this will indeed be the spot for my image 2. Now, what about the opposite direction? What happens if you have a negative lens before the positive lens? So let's keep the same criteria, but now I'm going to have my negative lens before my positive lens. Note for my lenses, I am making these empty. The triangles are empty because these are for my lenses. Negative, and this one is positive. And I have 10 F1 left, F1 right. And similarly on this side, I have F2 left and F2 right. Of course, I'm not drawing these to exactly to scale, but you need to draw them exactly to scale. But the lenses will work out no matter what we do. Okay, so now I will draw my object. I'm going to draw it slightly bigger. And my object is at 20 centimeters. Suppose this is my object. And this, the first one is a diverging lens. So let's start at the beginning. The first one I'm going to have is my principal ray. Goes and hits it. And now the ray has to diverge. So that means it has to go somewhere like this. But how much it has to go depends on the focal length. So I'm going to retrace from my focal point to this point, and that's how much it's going to diverge away. This is my principal one. Now my chief ray always does the same thing. It has to hit the tip, has to start from the tip of this object, and it has to hit the center. So I can just draw this going all the way out. And now I've used up my focal 1 left. I only have focal 1 right left. So I can redraw that and I can say, let me do it with green. How much of it I'm going to need depends on this focal ray. So I have to start from the tip here again. And I have to draw a real line. So I'm going to draw a dotted line just so I know where I'm going. But this is going to be a real line here because the rays are actually going there. And then these rays become parallel once they hit the lens. So this is where my focal 1 goes. This is where my chief 1 goes. Now, where do all 3 points hit? So as such, it doesn't seem like they're all hitting somewhere. But if I extend this one back, they all seem to hit here. And that is indeed where my image 1 will be. This is my object, and that's where my image 1 will be. Now comes the hard part. Now, when you're looking for the second lens, ignore everything to do with the first lens, right? And we're going to start over. So for my second lens, I have the same 3 rays, parallel, focal, and chief. So let's start with the parallel ray first. Ignoring the negative lens, this will be my parallel ray, P2. Because it's a converging lens, it converges in to F2R. So my P2 goes through here. Then I go next to my chief ray. The chief ray has to hit the top of your object now and the center here. So these are the 2 spots that the chief ray has to hit. So let me try to join these 2 points. I know my picture is not going to be straight because I'm not using rulers, but hopefully yours will be better than mine. So this is going to be my C2. Now, again, this is a lens, so I've already used up my F2R, so I'm left with F2L, and that is indeed where my focal ray will go through. So I think I used orange for my first one, so I'm just going to stick with the same criteria. And then this ray will have to touch here, F2, and it has to touch the top here, right? So how do I make that happen? I'm going to make it go like this, and then it hits here. And then after it hits it, it goes straight out. I know my rays are kind of crooked, but of course you're going to do a better job than me. So this is where my F2 will be. So my final image will actually be formed here. This will be my eye